The morning my wife was buried, my son Marcus didn't shed a single tear. I watched him through the haze of my own grief, standing at the edge of Evelyn's grave, in his tailored black suit, checking his watch like he had somewhere more important to be. When the priest finished his final blessing, Marcus pulled out his phone and walked away before the first shovel of dirt hit the casket. I stood there until the cemetery workers finished filling the grave. The December wind cut through my coat, but I couldn't bring myself to leave her. Not yet. 41 years of marriage don't just end with a handful of roses dropped onto polished mahogany. They end in fragments, in the sudden absence of her humming in the kitchen, in the cold side of the bed that would never warm again, in the reading glasses still sitting on a nightstand waiting for eyes that would never return. Evelyn had been sick for 3 years, pancreatic cancer. The doctors gave her 6 months when they found it, but my wife was stubborn. She fought for 3 years, and I was beside her for every treatment, every hospital stay, every moment of hope and despair. Marcus visited twice during that entire time. Once when she was first diagnosed, and once at the very end, when the lawyers told him it was time to discuss the estate. I should have seen then what my son had become. But grief has a way of making you blind to the obvious. The reading of the will took place 4 days after the funeral, in the oak-paneled office of Harrison Webb, the attorney Evelyn's family had used for 3 generations. Marcus arrived 15 minutes late, smelling of expensive cologne and impatience. He dropped into the leather chair beside me without a word of greeting. Harrison, a gentleman in his 70s who had known Evelyn since she was a girl, cleared his throat and began reading. The formalities passed in a blur of legal language, until he reached the section that made Marcus lean forward in his seat. To my son, Marcus Andrew Whitmore, I leave the Villa Serena in Positano, Italy, along with all its contents and the sum of $2 million to maintain its upkeep. Marcus actually smiled. It was the first genuine expression I had seen on his face since he arrived. Harrison continued. To my beloved husband, Daniel James Whitmore, I leave our family home in Westchester, the remaining contents of our joint savings and investment accounts, and the beach cabin in Montauk that belonged to my grandmother. I felt Marcus stiffen beside me. The family home in Westchester was worth over $4 million. The investments Evelyn and I had accumulated over our marriage totaled another $3 million. The beach cabin in Montauk, I had almost forgotten it existed. Evelyn's grandmother had left it to her decades ago, but we had never visited. Evelyn always said she would take me there someday, but life kept getting in the way. That's it, Marcus said, his voice sharp. She left him everything else. Harrison looked at my son over the rim of his reading glasses. Mrs. Whitmore was very specific in her wishes. Marcus, you wanted to ensure your father was cared for. Cared for? Marcus laughed, but there was no warmth in it. He's got the house, the savings, and some abandoned shack on the beach. I get a vacation home I'll visit maybe twice a year. I turned to look at my son. Marcus, the villa in Italy is worth less than what you're getting. He cut me off. Mom always did favor you, even from the grave. Harrison tried to intervene, but Marcus was already standing, stuffing his copy of the will into his briefcase. We'll see about this. I'm going to have my lawyers look at this. There's no way she was in her right mind at the end. The words hit me like a physical blow. She was in her right mind. Marcus, I was there every day. She knew exactly what she was doing. My son looked down at me with an expression I had never seen before, cold contempt mixed with something darker. Of course you'd say that. You'd probably coached her, didn't you? Whispered in her ear while she was dying. Made sure you got the lion's share. Marcus, don't. He held up his hand. I don't want to hear it. We're done here. He left without another word. Harrison and I sat in silence. For a long moment, the echo of the slamming door still ringing in my ears. I'm sorry, Daniel Harrison said quietly. I've known your son since he was born. I never imagined he would react this way. I shook my head slowly. Neither did I. The truth was, I had imagined it. I had feared it for years. Marcus had changed. After he went to business school, after he started climbing the corporate ladder, after he married a woman who measured success in square footage and designer labels. But Evelyn had always defended him. He's still our boy, she would say. He's just lost his way. He'll find it again. She never got to see if she was right. The weeks that followed were a blur of grief and legal battles. Marcus made good on his threat. His lawyers challenged the will, claiming Evelyn had been mentally incapacitated by her illness that had exerted undue influence over her decisions. The accusations were absurd. Evelyn had drafted the will 2 years before her death, when she was still lucid and strong, but that didn't stop them from tying up the estate and probate court during this time. I stayed in the Westchester house alone. The silence was unbearable. Every room held a memory of Evelyn. Every corner echoed with her absence. I found myself talking to her photograph, telling her about my day, asking for advice I knew would never come. Marcus didn't call once during those weeks. The only communication I received was through his lawyer's formal letters demanding documentation, questioning every financial decision Evelyn and I had ever made, accusing me of hiding assets. Then, 3 months after the funeral, everything changed. I was sitting in the kitchen, eating a dinner I couldn't taste, when the doorbell rang. I found Marcus standing on the porch with a woman I didn't recognize, a thin blonde in a business suit carrying a leather portfolio. "Dad," Marcus said, pushing past me into the house. "This is Catherine Reeves. She's a real estate appraiser." "An appraiser? For what?" Marcus was already walking through the living room, pointing out features to Catherine, who was taking notes. "The house. Obviously, we need an accurate assessment for the estate proceedings." "The estate proceedings you initiated," I reminded him. "The house isn't being sold, Marcus. It's mine. Your mother left it to me." He turned to face me, and I saw something in his eyes that made my blood run cold. It wasn't just greed. It was triumph, actually. "That's what I came to tell you. My lawyers found a loophole. Since the house was originally purchased with funds from Mom's inheritance, her family money, they're arguing it should have been part of her estate, not a marital asset. The judge is going to rule in our favor." I felt the floor shift beneath my feet. "That's not possible. Your mother and I bought this house together. We paid the mortgage together for 30 years. With her money," Marcus said. "Her inheritance made the down payment. Her trust fund covered the renovations. My lawyers have the documentation." Catherine excused herself to continue the appraisal upstairs. Marcus and I stood in the living room that had been my home for 3 decades, facing each other like strangers. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm your father." "You are my mother's husband," Marcus replied. "That's not the same thing. You spent 40 years living off her family's money, playing at being a partner while she did all the real work. Now that she's gone, I'm making sure her legacy goes where it belongs." "Where it belongs? You mean to you?" Marcus shrugged. I'm her son, her only child. I have a right to protect what's mine. What's yours?" I felt anger rising in my chest, hot and unfamiliar. I worked my entire career to support this family. I was there for every recital, every game, every birthday. Where were you when your mother was dying? Where were you when she needed you? "I had responsibilities," Marcus said, his voice flat. "A business to run. I couldn't drop everything to play nursemaid." Nursemaid. The word tasted like poison. She was your mother, Marcus. She loved you more than anything in this world, and you couldn't be bothered to say goodbye. For just a moment, I saw something flicker across my son's face, guilt maybe, or regret, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by that cold, corporate mask. "The judge is going to rule next week," he said. My advice, "Start packing." He was right. The judge ruled in his favor. I didn't understand the legal reasonings about asset origins and inheritance laws and estate preservation, but the result was clear. The house I had lived in for 30 years, the house where I had raised my son and cared for my dying wife, was no longer mine. The court gave me 60 days to vacate. I spent those 60 days in a fog, sorting through a lifetime of possessions, trying to decide what to keep and what to let go. Most of the furniture went to charity. The books, the artwork, the china we had collected on trips around the world, I couldn't bear to look at any of it. In the end, I packed only clothes, photographs, and a few of Evelyn's personal items that Marcus's lawyers had determined held no monetary value. On the last day, as I loaded the final boxes into my car, Marcus arrived with a moving truck and a team of men ready to claim his inheritance. He watched me from the porch as I made my final trip through the empty house, saying goodbye to the walls that had witnessed so much of my life. When I came outside, he was waiting by my car. "There is one thing left," he said, holding out an envelope. "The beach cabin in Montauk. The court ruled that stays with you. Mom's grandmother left it to her directly, and Mom left it to you. Not worth fighting over." I took the envelope, which contained a key and a handwritten address. "I haven't been there in years," Marcus continued, a smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. "Last I heard, the place was falling apart. Condemned, probably. He might as well sell the land and find an apartment somewhere. Thank you for your concern, I said, the words tasting bitter. Or don't. Marcus stepped back, gesturing toward my packed car. Go live with the rats, for all I care. You were always more comfortable in squalor anyway. I stared at my son, this stranger who wore my child's face, and felt something break inside me, not my heart, that had already shattered when Evelyn died. This was something deeper. The last thread of hope that the boy I had raised might still exist somewhere inside the man he had become. Goodbye, Marcus, I said. He didn't respond. He just turned and walked into the house that used to be my home, closing the door behind him. I drove for 3 hours, the Long Island Expressway on before me like a grey ribbon of escape. The address led me east, past the Hamptons and their manicured estates, past the tourist towns with their summer crowds now shuttered for the off-season, all the way to the easternmost tip of the island, where the land narrowed and the ocean pressed in from both sides. The road to the cabin wasn't marked on any GPS. I found it only by following Evelyn's grandmother's handwritten directions, which had been folded inside the envelope with the key. Past the old lighthouse, the faded ink read, turn left at the stone wall, follow the path until it ends. The house will be waiting. The path was barely a path, any more of a suggestion carved through decades of overgrown beach grass and wind-bent scrub pines. My car bounced over ruts and rocks, the chassis groaning in protest. More than once, I considered turning back, but where would I go? I had no home, no family, no place in the world that wanted me. So I kept driving until the path ended at a wall of brush so thick I couldn't see beyond it. I got out of the car. The wind off the ocean was fierce here, carrying the smell of salt and decay. I could hear waves crashing somewhere nearby, but the vegetation blocked any view of the water. The brush wasn't impenetrably, just neglected. I pushed through it, branches scraping at my coat, and emerged on the other side to find myself standing at the edge of a clearing, and there was the cabin. Marcus had called it a shack, and from the outside, he wasn't entirely wrong. The structure was small, maybe 800 square feet, 2 stories, with a wraparound porch that had seen better days. The wood siding had weathered to a silver grey, and several windows were boarded up. The roof sagged in places, and the front steps were more wrought than wood. But there was something about it, something that made me stand there, despite the cold, just looking. The cabin was old, over 100 years. If Evelyn's stories about her grandmother were accurate, it had survived hurricanes and nor'easters and decades of neglect, and it was still standing. I approached the front door. The key in my hand was old brass, heavy and tarnished. It didn't fit the modern deadbolt that someone had added to the door. But when I tried the deadbolt, I found it was already unlocked. The original lock, an antique mechanism that the brass key was meant for, was frozen with rust. I tried the key anyway. Nothing. I tried again, applying pressure, jiggling it the way you do with stubborn locks. Still nothing. The wind was picking up, bringing the first drops of an incoming storm. I was cold, exhausted, and homeless. I was not going to be defeated by a locked door. I stepped back, looked at the frame, and made a decision. The wood rounded. The lock was soft with age and moisture. It took 3 solid kicks before the frame splintered and the door swung inward, revealing nothing but darkness. I stepped inside. The smell hit me first, not the mustiness I expected, but something else, something cleaner. I fumbled for a light switch, found one by the door, and flipped it. Nothing happened, of course. The power had probably been cut off years ago. I pulled out my phone, turned on the flashlight, and swept the beam across the interior, and I stopped breathing. The cabin wasn't abandoned. It wasn't falling apart. It was I couldn't process what I was seeing. My brain refused to accept the evidence in front of my eyes. The interior was immaculate. The floors were polished hardwood, gleaming in my phone's light. The walls were freshly painted a soft cream color. Those beautiful furniture, antique pieces that looked like they belonged in a museum. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and above it hung a painting I recognized immediately. It was a portrait of Evelyn, young Evelyn, before the illness, before the grey hair and the tired eyes. She was smiling in the painting, her eyes bright, with a joy I hadn't seen in years. I moved deeper into the cabin, my light revealing more impossibilities. A kitchen with modern appliances hidden behind vintage cabinetry. A bathroom with a clawfoot tub and brass fixtures that shone like new. Every detail was perfect, every surface clean, as if someone had been maintaining this place for years. But that wasn't the thing that made me stop breathing. On the dining room table, in the exact center, was an envelope, and written on the front of that envelope in handwriting I would recognize anywhere was a single word: Daniel. My hands were shaking as I picked it up. The envelope was thick, heavy, with multiple pages inside. I broke the seal and pulled out the contents, a letter in Evelyn's handwriting, along with a stack of legal documents. I carried everything to a chair by the window, where the fading daylight gave me enough illumination to read. And as I began to read my wife's final letter to me, the world I thought I knew began to collapse. My darling Daniel, the letter began. If you're reading this, then I am gone, and I can only imagine the grief you're carrying. I'm so sorry, my love. I'm sorry for leaving you. I'm sorry for the pain I know you're feeling. But most of all, I'm sorry for keeping secrets from you, secrets I should have shared years ago. You're probably wondering about this cabin, about how it looks now compared to how you expected it to look. The answer is simple. I've been preparing it for you. For the past 15 years, I've been coming here without you, without Marcus, without anyone knowing. This was my sanctuary, my secret place. And I've spent those years making it perfect for the day when you would need it most, and you need it now. I know you do. Because I know what Marcus has become. I looked up from the letter, my heart pounding. 15 years Evelyn had been secretly visiting this cabin, secretly renovating it for 15 years. Through our anniversaries and holidays. Through Marcus's wedding and the birth of grandchildren we rarely saw. Through the early years of her illness, when I thought she was resting at home while I was at work. 15 years of secrets. I returned to the letter. You're probably angry. I would be angry, in your position. But please read everything before you judge me. Please understand why I did what I did. It started when Marcus was 25. You remember that year he had just finished his MBA, just gotten his first job. At the investment firm, he was so proud of him. I was too, at first, but then I started noticing things. Small things. The way he talked about his colleagues, dismissive, contemptuous, the way he treated waiters and clerks and anyone he considered beneath him, the way his eyes went cold when he talked about money. I told myself it was just ambition, just the confidence of youth. But then I saw him do something I've never told you about, something that changed everything. It was at his engagement party, the one we threw at the house. I walked into the kitchen and found him on the phone with someone, a business associate, I assume. He was laughing, and the things he was saying. Daniel, he was describing how he had manipulated an elderly client out of her savings. A widow, a woman the same age as his grandmother. He was laughing about how easy it had been. I confronted him afterward. I told him what I had heard. And you know what he said to me? He said, "Mind your own business, mother. This is how the world works. If people are too stupid to protect themselves, they deserve what they get." That was the moment I knew I had lost my son. The boy we raised, the child I loved, he was gone. Replaced by someone I didn't recognize. Someone dangerous. I couldn't tell you. I couldn't bear to see your heart break the way mine had broken. So I started making plans. The letter went on 4 pages, detailing everything Evelyn had done to protect me. The secret renovations, the hidden accounts, the conversations with lawyers about how to structure her will so that Marcus couldn't take everything. The medical records she had meticulously maintained to prove her mental competence, anticipating the legal challenge that would come. But the real shock came on the final page. Daniel, there's something else. Something I found that you need to see. When I inherited this cabin from my grandmother, I thought it was just a neglected beach house. But when I started renovating, I discovered something in the walls. My grandmother had hidden it there decades ago, and I don't think she ever told anyone it existed. The documents are in the fireplace, behind the loose stone, third from the bottom on the left side. I've included instructions for accessing them. What you find will change everything, not just for you, but for Marcus as well. I love you, Daniel. I have always loved you. And I'm sorry I couldn't tell you these things while I was alive. But I'm telling you now, from whatever place exists beyond this world, that you are not alone. You were never alone. And the future is brighter than you can possibly imagine. Forever yours. Evelyn and I sat in that chair as darkness fell around me, the letter clutched in my trembling hands. The storm outside had arrived in full force, rain hammering against the windows, wind howling through the eaves. but I barely noticed. 15 years of secrets, a son who had become a monster, and something hidden in the fireplace that would change everything. I stood up and walked to the fireplace, counting the stones on the left side. Third from the bottom, I found a stone that looked identical to the others, but shifted slightly. When I pressed it, behind it was a space carved into the chimney itself, just large enough to hold a metal lockbox covered in decades of dust. I pulled it out, carried it to the table, and opened it, and that was when I truly stopped breathing. Part 2. Inside the lockbox were documents, dozens of them, some yellowed with age, others more recent. There were photographs, 2 black and white images of people I didn't recognize, standing in front of buildings and signing papers and shaking hands with men in expensive suits. But on top of everything else was another letter, this one written in an older hand. The ink faded to brown. My dearest Evelyn, it began. If you're reading this, then I am gone, and the secret I've kept for 60 years is now yours to carry. I'm sorry to burden you with this, my granddaughter, but you're the only one I trust. You're the only one who will understand what to do. The letter was from Evelyn's grandmother, Eleanor, written decades ago, but never delivered while she was alive. It told a story I could scarcely believe, a story of property and deception, of wealth hidden and forgotten, of crimes committed by powerful men who assumed they would never be caught. Eleanor had been a young woman in the 1940s, working as a secretary for a real estate developer in New York City. The developer was a ruthless man named Harrison Gould, and Eleanor had discovered that he was systematically defrauding immigrant families out of their land-buying properties for pennies on the dollar through forged documents and intimidation, then selling them to wealthy investors for massive profits. Eleanor had gathered evidence, contracts, correspondence, witness statements, everything she needed to expose Harrison Gould and his crimes. But before she could go to the authorities, Gould had discovered what she was doing. He had threatened her family, and Eleanor had fled, taking the evidence with her and hiding it in the walls of her beach cabin. Too afraid to come forward, but unable to destroy the proof of what had happened, she had lived with that secret for 60 years, and then she had passed it on to Evelyn. But that wasn't the part that made me stop breathing. The part that made me stop breathing was the list of properties, the dozens of parcels of land that Harrison Gould had stolen, properties that his descendants had inherited and developed and profited from for generations. One of those properties was a 4-block section of what was now downtown Manhattan. Current estimated value, over $300 million, and according to Eleanor's documents, the rightful owner of that land was a man named Roberto Moreno, an Italian immigrant who had been cheated out of his inheritance in 1947. Roberto Moreno. The name meant nothing to me, but the name of his daughter did. Patricia Moreno Gould, the woman who had married Harrison Gould's son, the woman who had become Patricia Gould Whitmore when she remarried after her first husband's death, the woman who was Evelyn's mother. I sat back, my mind reeling. Evelyn's grandmother hadn't just stumbled upon fraud. She had uncovered the crime that had created her own family's wealth. Evelyn's mother had inherited money that was stolen from her own father. And Evelyn had known. She had found these documents when she renovated the cabin, and she had known that her entire family fortune, the money that had bought our house, that had paid for Marcus's education, that had funded the lifestyle my son now felt entitled to, built on theft. Why hadn't she told me? Why hadn't she gone to the authorities? I kept reading, finding more letters in the lockbox, correspondence between Evelyn and lawyers she had consulted quietly over the years, research she had done into the Moreno family, tracking down Roberto's descendants, legal opinions about the statute of limitations, about the possibility of recovering the stolen property, about what would happen if the truth came out. And then I found the final document, a letter from an attorney dated 3 weeks before Evelyn's death. Dear Mrs. Whitmore, it read, I am pleased to inform you that our investigation has reached a conclusion. We have located all surviving descendants of Roberto Moreno, and they have agreed to the settlement you proposed, in exchange for the documentation proving the original fraud. They have accepted a payment of $50 million from the Gould Family Trust, to be distributed among the Moreno heirs. Furthermore, as discussed, the remaining assets of the Gould Family Trust, including the Villa Serena in Positano, and all associated holdings, will be transferred to you as the sole surviving legitimate heir of Patricia Moreno Gould, per the terms of your mother's original will before it was altered by Harrison Gould Jr. The transfer documents are enclosed for your signature. Once executed, these assets will pass to your estate upon your death, to be distributed according to your wishes. I put down the letter and stared at the wall. Evelyn had known everything. She had spent years quietly investigating her family's crimes, making things right with the victims, and restructuring the assets to ensure they would go where she wanted them to go. The Villa in Italy that Marcus had inherited wasn't really his inheritance. It was Evelyn's passed to her as restitution for her grandfather's stolen land. And according to these documents, she had the legal right to determine who received it. She had given it to Marcus anyway, despite knowing what he had become. Despite knowing that the wealth he felt entitled to had been stolen from innocent people. She had given it to him because he was her son, and she had loved him even as she recognized what he was. But she had also left me this cabin, and inside this cabin she had left me the truth. I understood now why she had done it this way. If she had told me while she was alive, I would have confronted Marcus. I would have demanded answers, probably hired lawyers, almost certainly made the whole situation public. And Evelyn, who had spent years quietly fixing her family's mistakes, hadn't wanted that. She had wanted peace. She had wanted justice, and she had wanted to protect me. The documents in this lockbox were proof that Marcus's inheritance was built on fraud. If I went public with them, the Marino heirs could reopen the case. The settlement could be reversed. Everything Marcus had inherited could be taken away. I held that power in my hands, with the power to destroy my son. I spent that night in the cabin, listening to the storm rage outside, reading and rereading Evelyn's letters. By morning, the rain had stopped and pale sunlight. It was filtering through the windows, illuminating the home my wife had built for me in secret. It was beautiful. Every detail was exactly what I would have chosen: the colors, the furniture, the way the light fell through the windows. Evelyn had known me better than I knew myself. She had created this place as a final gift, a sanctuary where I could heal from everything that had been taken from me, but she had also given me a choice. The documents in the lockbox weren't just evidence of old crimes. They were weapons. Weapons I could use against the son who had betrayed me, who had stolen my home and called me a parasite and told me to go live with the rats. I could destroy Marcus with these papers. I could take away his villa, his inheritance, his position in society. I could expose him as the heir to stolen wealth and watch his carefully constructed life crumble. Part of me wanted to do exactly that. The wounded part, the angry part, the part that still heard his voice saying, "Go live with the rats, for all I care." That part wanted revenge. But Evelyn's voice was in my head too. Her letter had ended with hope, not vengeance. She had given me these documents, not as weapons, but as knowledge. She had wanted me to understand the truth about her family, about her son, about the complicated web of love and betrayal that had shaped all our lives. And she had trusted me to make the right choice. I spent the next week in the cabin, adjusting to my new life. The power had been cut off years ago, but Evelyn had arranged for solar panels and a battery system during her renovations. I found instructions in a notebook she had left, explaining how to restart the system, how to maintain the property, how to access the accounts she had set up to cover expenses. She had thought of everything. Of course she had. That was Evelyn, thoughtful, always 3 steps ahead. The cabin wasn't just beautiful, it was valuable. The land alone was worth several $1,000,000, but that wasn't the real treasure. The real treasure was the life it offered me: peace, solitude, a place where I could grieve without the constant reminders of everything I had lost. I walked on the beach every morning, watching the sun rise over the Atlantic. I read books from the library Evelyn had stocked. I cooked simple meals in the kitchen she had designed. And slowly, day by day, I began to heal, but I couldn't stop thinking about Marcus. He had what he wanted now: the house in Westchester, the villa in Italy, the satisfaction of having defeated his father and claimed his inheritance. He probably thought he had won. He had no idea what I knew. No idea that his entire fortune was built on stolen land and forged documents. No idea that I held the power to take everything away. I thought about calling him, thought about confronting him with the truth, watching his face as he realized his mother had known all along what kind of person he was. The fantasy was satisfying in a dark way, seeing his arrogance crumble, watching him understand that his victory was hollow. But Evelyn's letter kept stopping me. She hadn't wanted revenge. She had wanted me to be happy. She had wanted me to have peace. Could I have peace if I destroyed my own son? The answer came to me on a grey morning in early February, nearly 3 months after Evelyn's death. I was walking on the beach, watching storm clouds gather on the horizon, when my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something made me swipe the screen. Mr. Whitmore, a woman's voice, professional but hesitant. This is Dr. Sarah Chon at Mount Sinai Hospital. I'm calling about your son Marcus. My heart stopped. What happened? He was brought in last night. A cardiac event. He's stable now, but he's asking to see you. I stood on the beach, the wind whipping my coat, the phone pressed to my ear. A cardiac event. Marcus was only in his 40s. He was healthy, successful, at the peak of his career. He wasn't supposed to have cardiac events. Mr. Whitmore, are you still there? Yes, I said. I'm here. He's been asking for you since he regained consciousness. Will you come? The drive to Manhattan took 4 hours. I had time to think, to prepare myself for what I might find, to decide what I was going to say. But when I walked into Marcus's hospital room and saw him lying in that bed, all my preparations evaporated. He looked old. That was my first thought. My son looked old. His face was pale and drawn, his eyes shadowed with something I hadn't seen in years. Fear, Dad. His voice was barely above a whisper. He came, sat down in the chair beside his bed. The room was private, expensive, filled with flowers from colleagues and business associates. But Marcus was alone. His wife wasn't there. His children weren't there. It's just my son, lying in a hospital bed, facing his mortality for perhaps the first time in his life. The doctors say he had a heart attack, I said. A minor one. He tried to smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. I was in a meeting when it happened. Everyone thought I was having a stroke at first. The looks on their faces. He trailed off, staring at the ceiling. Why did you ask for me? I said. After everything that happened, why did you want me here? Marcus was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was different than I had ever heard it. Smaller, younger, almost like the boy he used to be. I was dying, he said. At least, I thought I was. They had the paddles on my chest, and I could feel myself slipping away, and all I could think about was how alone I was. How I had pushed everyone away. How the last thing I said to my father was to go live with the rats. His voice broke on the last word. I watched tears slide down his cheeks. Real tears, the first I had seen from him since he was a child. I'm sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry for everything. The things I said, the things I did. I don't know how I became this person. I don't know when. I stopped being your son and became this ... this monster. I sat very still, listening. Part of me wanted to believe him, wanted to accept his apology and forgive everything and have my son back. But another part of me remembered Evelyn's letter, the story about the widow he had defrauded, the coldness in his eyes when he threw me out of my own home. Marcus, I said carefully, a heart attack doesn't change who you are. It's a warning, not a redemption. He nodded, wiping his eyes with a trembling hand. I know that. But lying here, thinking I might never have a chance to make things right. Dad, I don't want to die like this. I don't want to die alone, knowing that the last years of my life were spent hurting the people who loved me. What are you asking me? He turned his head to look at me directly. I'm asking for a second chance. I'm asking if you can ever forgive me. Not right away, I know, I don't deserve that. But someday, if I prove that I can be better. I thought about the documents in the cabin. The evidence of fraud, the stolen wealth, the generations of lies. I thought about how easy it would be to tell Marcus the truth right now. To watch his remorse curdle into something else when he realized his inheritance was built on crimes. But I also thought about Evelyn, about her letter, about the way she had loved our son even when she saw what he had become. Even as she made plans to protect herself from him, she had given me a choice, not just about whether to expose the fraud, but about what kind of man I wanted to be. I forgive you, I said. Marcus's face crumpled with relief. He reached for my hand, and I let him take it. Thank you, Dad. Thank you. I swear I'll make it up. To you, I'll be better. I'll be the son Mom wanted me to be. I squeezed his hand and said nothing, because I knew that promises made in hospital beds are easy. The hard part comes later, when the fear fades and the old habits return. Marcus might mean every word he was saying right now, but whether he would follow through remained to be seen. And I had learned from Evelyn that hope and caution can coexist. The months that followed were a slow, complicated process of rebuilding. Marcus was discharged from the hospital with strict instructions about diet and exercise and stress management. His wife, Shannon, came back into the picture, and I learned that their marriage had been in trouble for years. The heart attack served as a wake-up call for both of them. I visited them occasionally, making the drive from Montauk to their apartment in the city. Marcus was different, now quieter, more thoughtful. He asked about my life at the cabin, about what I was reading, about how I was coping with Evelyn's death. These were questions he never would have asked before, but I also saw flashes of the old Marcus, impatience with waiters, dismissiveness toward people he considered unimportant. The cold calculation behind his eyes when he talked about business. Evelyn had been right. The boy we raised was still in there somewhere, but he was buried deep, and I wasn't sure he would ever fully emerge. I made a decision. I wasn't going to expose the fraud. I wasn't going to destroy Marcus with the documents in the cabin, but I also wasn't going to let the truth die with me. I hired an attorney, a different one from any Evelyn had used, and had a new will drawn up. In it, I left the cabin and all its contents to a trust, with instructions that upon my death, the lockbox and its documents would be turned over to the Merino heirs and their lawyers. If Marcus had truly changed, if he had become the man Evelyn hoped he would be, then the documents would simply be historical evidence of old crimes. His statute of limitations had long since passed. The Merino heirs had already received their settlement. Nothing would change. But if Marcus went back to his old ways, if he'd betrayed me again or hurt someone else the way he had hurt that widow, then the documents would be there, waiting, a sword hanging over his head that he would never know about, until it fell. It wasn't revenge, it was insurance, a way of honoring Evelyn's memory and protecting her legacy without actively destroying our son. The years passed. I lived in the cabin, walking on the beach, reading, thinking, slowly building a new life from the wreckage of the old. Marcus and Shannon had another child, a daughter they named Evelyn Rose. When Marcus called to tell me, I could hear something in his voice I hadn't heard in decades. Pride, yes, but also wonder. The wonder of a man who had been given a second chance and was determined not to waste it. I visited my granddaughter when she was born, held her in my arms and looked into her eyes, Evelyn's eyes, the same bright green that had captured my heart 45 years earlier, and I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness, exactly. More like hope. Marcus watched me hold his daughter, and I saw tears in his eyes. "I'm sorry," he said again, "for everything. I'm going to be a better father to her than I was a son to you. I believe you're going to try," I said. It was the most honest thing I could offer. The truth is, I never fully forgave Marcus's forgiveness. Isn't a single moment. It's a process, a daily choice, a commitment to letting go of anger, even when that anger feels justified. Some days I woke up in the cabin and felt nothing but peace. Other days, I remembered his sneer, his cruelty, the way he had stripped away everything I had built over a lifetime, and the old rage flared up again. But I learned to live with both feelings, love and anger, hope and caution, trust and vigilance. These things can coexist in a heart that has been broken and slowly mended. Evelyn had known that. She had lived it for years, loving our son even as she saw what he had become. Preparing for the worst while hoping for the best, she had built the cabin as a sanctuary, but she had also hidden the documents as a safeguard. Both things were true. Both things were necessary. I understood her now, in a way I never had while she was alive. I understood the secrets she had kept and why she had kept them. I understood the impossible position she had been in, caught between loyalty to her son and knowledge of his crimes, between love for her family and awareness of the injustice that had created their wealth. She had done the best she could with an impossible situation, and she had trusted me to do the same. That cabin stands on the edge of the Atlantic, battered by storms, but still standing after more than a century. I've lived here for 5 years. Now, longer than I lived in a house Marcus took from me. It's home in a way that place never quite was, smaller, simpler, but entirely mine. I walk on the beach every morning, just like I did that first week. The sunrise over the ocean never gets old. The sound of the waves, the smell of salt, the endless horizon, these things remind me that the world is bigger than any single person's grief or anger or hope. Marcus calls every week now. He tells me about his children, his work, the therapy he's been doing to understand why he became the man he was. I listen. I ask questions. I try to be the father he needs, even though part of me will always remember the father he threw away last month. He came to visit the cabin for the first time. He stood in the doorway, looking around at the home Evelyn had built, and had watched his face as recognition dawned. "She did all this?" he asked. "For you, for us," I said. "For the future." Marcus walked through the rooms, touching the furniture, examining the photographs on the walls. When he came to the portrait above the fireplace, young Evelyn, smiling and bright-eyed, he stopped and stared for a long time. "I miss her," he said quietly. "I didn't realize how much until she was gone. And then it was too late." "It's never too late to honor someone's memory," I said. "It's never too late to become the person they hoped you would be." He looked at me, and for just a moment I saw my son. Not the corporate shark, not the heartless manipulator, but the boy who used to run to me when he scraped his knee, who asked me to check under his bed for monsters, who told me I was the best dad in the world. That boy was still in there, buried deep, damaged by years of wrong choices, but still alive. "I'm trying, Dad," he said. "I'm really trying." "I know you are," I said, "and that's enough. For now, that's enough." We stood together in the cabin Evelyn built, looking out at the ocean she loved, and for the first time in years, it felt something like peace. The lockbox is still in the fireplace, hidden behind the loose stone. The documents are still there, waiting. Maybe Marcus will stay on his path, and they'll never be needed. Maybe he'll fall back into old patterns, and the truth will have to come out. I don't know what the future holds. No one does. But I know that Evelyn loved me enough to build this sanctuary. I know that she loved our son enough to give him his inheritance, despite knowing what he was. And I know that she trusted me enough to leave the final choice in my hands. She was always the strongest of us, the wisest, the one who saw clearly even when the rest of us were blind. I'm sitting on the porch as I write this, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. The wind is warm tonight, carrying the promise of summer. Somewhere in the city, my son is putting his daughter to bed, reading her stories, trying to be the father he never was to me. And somewhere beyond the horizon, beyond the edge of the world, I like to think Evelyn is watching, hoping, believing that the love she left behind will be enough to heal what was broken. I don't know if it will be, but I'm going to try, for her, for Marcus, for little Evelyn Rose, who carries her grandmother's name in her grandmother's eyes, for all the years we had together, and all the years we lost, and all the years that are still to come. The cabin stands, the truth waits, and life, somehow, goes on. That's what Evelyn taught me, in the end. Not through words, but through actions. Through 15 years of secret renovations and hidden documents, and plans within plans. Through a letter that broke my heart and healed it at the same time. Life goes on. Even after betrayal. Even after grief. Even after everything you thought you knew turns out to be a lie. Life goes on, and the only choice we have is how we live it. I choose hope. Cautious, cliff-eyed hope, but hope nonetheless. I choose love. Complicated, painful, imperfect love, but love nonetheless. I choose to believe that people can change, not because they always do, but because sometimes, against all odds, they surprise you. Evelyn believed that. She believed it until the day she died, and now, in this cabin she built for me, on this beach she loved, I'm going to try to believe it too. For her, for all of us. The sun has set now, and the stars are coming out. I should go inside, make dinner, maybe call Marcus and tell him I'm proud of the man he's becoming. But for a few more minutes, I'll stay here on the porch, listening to the waves, feeling the wind on my face, remembering the woman who loved me, enough to plan for everything, even this moment. Sitting alone on a beach at the edge of the world, finally at peace. Thank you, Evelyn, for the cabin, for the truth, for 41 years of love that I didn't always deserve, but that you gave me anyway. Thank you for believing in me. I won't let you down. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the Astral Vengeance channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.